Join me as I dive deep into the aftermath of World War I and challenge myself to uncover the real events that shaped our modern world. The aftermath of World War I is one of the most pivotal moments in modern history. The war itself was a brutal and devastating conflict that left millions dead, cities in ruins, and entire nations in shambles. But what's often overlooked is the sheer scale of the chaos that followed in its wake. The war may have ended, but its impact on the world was only just beginning. In the years that followed, the world was left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the devastation. It was a time of great upheaval, with entire empires crumbling, new nations rising, and the global order being rewritten. And yet, despite its significance, this period is often glossed over in favor of more sensational stories. But not today. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the real events that shaped our modern world. The importance of understanding this period cannot be overstated. The aftermath of World War I set the stage for many of the conflicts and crises that we face today. From the rise of fascist dictators to the global economic downturn of the 1930s, the seeds of these events were sown in the aftermath of the war. So, let's get started and explore what really happened after World War I. After the war, countries around the world were left to deal with the devastating consequences of the conflict. Cities were in ruins, economies were in tatters, and entire generations had been decimated. It was a time of great uncertainty, and it seemed like the world was teetering on the brink of chaos. In the immediate aftermath of the war, there was a sense of jubilation and relief. The war was finally over, and people could begin to rebuild their lives. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, the stark reality of the situation began to sink in. The war may have been won, but the peace was far from won. One of the biggest challenges facing countries was the sheer scale of the destruction. Cities had been reduced to rubble, infrastructure had been destroyed, and entire industries had been decimated. It was a monumental task to even begin to rebuild, and it would take years of hard work and determination. Another major challenge was the rise of extremist movements. In the aftermath of the war, many people were disillusioned with the old order and were looking for new answers. This created a fertile ground for extremist ideologies, from communism to fascism, to take root. And as we'll see later, these ideologies would have far-reaching consequences. As countries struggled to come to terms with the New World Order, there was also a sense of political instability. Governments were toppling left and right, and there was a sense of uncertainty about what the future held. It was a time of great upheaval, and it seemed like the world was spinning out of control. In the midst of all this chaos, there was also a sense of social change. The war had brought about a sense of modernity, and people were beginning to question traditional values and social norms. It was a time of great liberation, and it would have far-reaching consequences for generations to come. As we'll see in the rest of this video, the challenges faced by countries in the aftermath of World War I were numerous and complex. But despite these challenges, it was also a time of great opportunity and change. And it's this complex interplay between chaos and opportunity that makes this period so fascinating. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was supposed to bring an end to the war and establish a new world order. But, as we now know, it was deeply flawed and would ultimately contribute to the rise of Nazi Germany. The treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, which led to widespread resentment and a sense of injustice. In the aftermath of the war, there was also a sense of colonial upheaval. The old empires were crumbling, and new nations were emerging. It was a time of great change, and it would have far-reaching consequences for global politics. The formation of the League of Nations was also a major development in the aftermath of the war. The League was established to promote international cooperation and prevent future wars. But despite its lofty goals, it would ultimately prove to be ineffective in preventing the outbreak of World War II. In the years that followed, there were also significant social changes taking place. The war had brought about a sense of modernity, and people were beginning to question traditional values and social norms. It was a time of great liberation, and it would have far-reaching consequences for generations to come. As we move forward in time, we begin to see the consequences of the war playing out on a global scale. The rise of fascist dictators, the global economic downturn of the 1930s, and the eventual outbreak of World War II, all of these events can be traced back to the aftermath of World War I. One of the key turning points in this period was the Great Depression of the 1930s. The Depression was a global economic downturn that had far-reaching consequences for countries around the world. It was a time of great hardship, and it would ultimately contribute to the rise of fascist and nationalist ideologies. The rise of fascist dictators like Hitler and Mussolini was another major development in this period. These dictators were able to capitalize on the widespread discontent and resentment that followed the war, and they would ultimately go on to shape the course of world history. As the world careened towards World War II, it became clear that the consequences of World War I had not been fully addressed. The war had set the stage for future conflicts, and the world was about to pay the price. In conclusion, the aftermath of World War I was a complex and tumultuous period that set the stage for many of the conflicts and crises that we face today. It was a time of great upheaval, but also a time of great opportunity and change. The lessons learned from this period are clear, that the consequences of war can be far-reaching and devastating, and that the world must work together to prevent future conflicts. Thanks for watching, and if you've got thoughts on the impact of World War I, please leave them in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more content on historical events and world history.